Okay guys, so we're out here today to do a test that I've been meaning to do for the longest time, but I'm finally just now able to get to it. That of course is going to be the bait finesse test of the mighty 2024 Shimano Metanium DC. Now, just a quick recap, this new Metanium DC does have the lightest DC spool ever. And even though it's kind of on the big side at 34 millimeters, seeing how the SLX DC XT handled BFS lures quite well gives me a lot of hope that this Metanium DC will perform at least, hopefully, just as good. But we're going to find out. Now, I have the reel mounted on my 6'3" ultralight powered Abu Garcia Salty Stage prototype horse mackerel rod, and I'll have to say this combo is devastating looking. Silver and black all around. And I have the spool filled not even halfway with 4-pound monofilament. I didn't have any fluorocarbon available, so we're gonna have to go with mono. But yeah, this rod is a moderate power. It's got a lure rating, I think, of 0.8 grams to I think just under half an ounce. One of my favorite BFS rods. So this should be a perfect combo to test out if the new Metanium DC has any kind of BFS capabilities. So we're out here at this trout river, and hopefully we'll be able to catch at least 1 or 2 fish. As you can see, the water is super low, and I'm hoping that means the fish are going to be concentrated somewhere. But I'm only going to be casting 3 lures with this Metanium DC just to see its bait finesse capabilities. The first one is going to be the Spearhead Ryuki 50 Suspend, weighs 3.3 grams. And let us set the reel up. Now, of course, we're going to set the spool tension, and I want it set probably with a little bit of side-to-side play, because I want nothing holding this spool back from starting to spin. Okay, so there is a little bit of side-to-side play that I've left in the spool tension, and now we got to decide on what brakes we're going to use. And I'm going to start on braid mode, because I think that's going to give us the least amount of brakes. And I'm going to turn the fine tuning to maximum. And I got a backlash. Hopefully I'll be able to pick this out. Now, unfortunately, when you are spooling up a reel that has a relatively deep spool, less than halfway, it's hard to explain, but because the line is having to start the spool up from, I guess, the middle of the spool or closer to the middle of the spool, it actually hinders performance. But we're gonna have to work with that. And yeah, let's get casting with this 3.3 gram Spearhead Ryuki, and I'll make adjustments if I need to. Here we go. Okay, so a nice easy sidearm swing got us about not even 10 yards. Hopefully you guys are seeing where it's landing. I would like to get the lure at least over to that slack water. I have a feeling fish might be over there, but the spool is, of course, perfectly controlled. There may not even be trout here, but let's do an overhead. So hopefully you guys can see. Maybe you can, maybe you can't, but it's landing right in the middle of the current. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn the fine tuning down 1 notch. Here we go. Oh wow, distance went up considerably. We actually reached the other side of the current there, just on the edge, and that's probably going out there at least 15 yards. Let's do another. Boom. Okay, and the spool is perfectly controlled. No fish. Let's do an overhead. So yeah, we're getting out there almost 60 feet in my estimation, at least 50. Now this is the first time I've actually fished here, so I don't know the spots. But boom. So far so good with the Metanium DC. But then again, you have to realize that a lot of modern reels these days can actually handle a 1/8 ounce lure quite easily if you put it on the right rod with the right line. All right, so we're going to turn the fine tuning down one more click. So we are pretty much in the middle. Let's see what happens. All right, so that cast went way off to the left. Not sure why. Okay, distance on that cast is about the same as the previous setting. I'm not seeing any kind of advantage. Let's do an overhead. Okay, so we are definitely well into that slack pool across the way, but it seems about the same as the previous fine tuning setting. Let's do one more. Okay, that's the farthest cast yet, and I did have some fluffing on the spool there. It's a nice lob rainbow style cast. So I mean 3.3 grams for the Metanium DC seems to be pretty easy. Pretty easy. So we're gonna turn the brakes down one more. We're gonna find the limit and see what the spool does. Spool was perfect. Wow. I know having such little line on the spool is definitely helping with the spool not blowing up on such a low brake setting. Okay, I saw some action over here. Let's see. Ooh, definitely some fluffing on that cast. I think we have reached our limit. Distance increase maybe a little bit. It's definitely trout in here. It's just figuring out what they want. So we'll do a few more and then we're gonna switch to a lighter lure. I'm gonna leave the brake setting where it was. So I think had a strike. I think probably looking at, I don't know, about 25 yards tops with this lure, with this rod and line on the Metanium DC, which, I mean, for a general purpose bass reel, to me that's definitely acceptable. Now if you want to see the Metanium DC go up against the DMK Smart DC reel, which is a bait finesse reel, in the cast comparison, hit the like button, and if I get, let's say, 300 likes, we'll make it happen. All right, one more cast. Wind is blowing from my right to my left. Boom. All right, let's switch up to an even lighter lure. All right, so we switched up to a lure that is a whopping 1 gram lighter in weight. My other favorite BFS trout lure, the Lucky Craft Pointer 48 Suspend. I believe it weighs 2.3 grams on the scale. Well into bait finesse territory. Now, if I'm not mistaken, I think the SLX XT DC handled this pretty easy. And let's see what the Metanium can do. Now remember, the XT has a slightly smaller spool than this Metanium, but it is heavier. So just to be safe, I'm gonna crank the fine tuning to the middle position. Let's see what happens. I'm going to cast over this way. All right, so accuracy was a little off, but we got out there probably about 40 feet. Oh, wow. The spool exploded. Look at that. So we definitely need to go up on the brakes. Now I could experiment with, you know, switching line modes, etc., but unfortunately I don't have time to do that today. So I'm going to stick with braid mode. Let me go ahead and turn up the fine tuning one click. All right, let's try again. Wow. Spool blew up. So I've turned the fine tuning to maximum. So going down 1 gram in lure weight significantly impacted the casting ability or the spool control of this Metanium DC. So now the fine tuning's turned to max. Okay. Perfect spool control, but we're looking at just barely 10 yards of casting distance. Barely 10 yards. I can cast as hard as I want. The spool's going to be locked down, but the distance is going to stay relatively poor. So hopefully you guys can see where this lure is landing. That's the distance we're getting out of this brake setting. Oh, if I'm not careful, the lure will go off to the left slightly. Let's do an overhead. Yep, casting distance. I mean, if that's good enough for you, then that's great, but for me, I need more. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna flip the line mode to fluorocarbon, which should give us the strongest braking profile, and then I'm gonna turn the fine tuning to the middle setting, and let's see what happens. Looks like the same thing happened. Awesome spool control, but poor distance relatively. Now, of course, if you're fishing a really skinny stream and this is enough distance, that's great, but I need a little more. So we are gonna turn the fine tuning down 1 click. All right, that's better. Got a little bit more distance, probably another close to 10 foot, I would say. And the spool is still locked down, so we're gonna crank the fine tuning down to minimum. After that, there's really not much else we can do to lower the brakes. Here we go. Boom, okay. So hopefully you guys saw that, but that got us to the other side of the flow right there, just to the edge of the slack water. 2.3 grams. Boom, okay. With the overhead, we got well into the slack water. That cast was a little bit shorter than the last, but the distance is gone up to probably at least 50 to 55 feet with this 2.3 gram lure. So not bad at all. Okay, just for fun, I'm gonna switch the line mode to nylon and click the fine tuning to the middle position and just to see what happens. I guess it turns out I am going to be messing with the line settings. Okay, spool control was perfect, no overruns. Okay, I'm going to turn the brakes down, or the fine tuning down, one click. Ooh. Okay, good distance, but I did blow the spool up a little bit. So it's good that you can play around with the adjustability of this IDC 5 system to, I guess, suit your needs. But it looks like for me it's going to be fluorocarbon mode in the minimum position. It seems to have more spool control than the current setting I'm on now, and there are fish here. I can definitely see them surfacing. Okay fellas, so the camera overheated, and that's because it is a little bit hot out here. So what I did off camera was I tied on the lightest lure to test. It's a little jerkbait from Japan. I think it weighs like 1.4 grams, so about a gram lighter than even the Pointer 48. I found what I thought was the best break setting, and I'm going to show you guys what the Metanium can do. Here we go. Now when I was dialing in the brakes for this lure, I think I was getting at most probably about 40 to 45 feet, if that. It's hard to say. This lure has no weights in it that I can see. There's no weight transfer or any kind of weights to help aid casting. So it's a tricky cast for even dedicated BFS reels. Okay, so it turns out this jerkbait is actually a floating jerkbait. So that would explain why there's no weights inside. But let's do a few casts, let you guys see what this Metanium DC can do. So on the best cast, you're probably looking at about 50 feet. The lure will go off slightly to the left if you're right-handed. Now, of course, you can adjust your release point to cure that, but it's not very severe, which is good. But 1.4 grams. And it's doing a pretty damn good job. Now, the brake setting I found best was fluorocarbon mode with the fine tuning to its minimum position. All right, we're going to do a few more. Hopefully it'll land somewhere you guys can see. Overhead cast is a little difficult. Sidearm is preferred. Boom, that was a good cast. Boom, that was a good cast.
So I'm going to end off this video with footage of the Metanium DC casting a 1.5 gram inline spinner and telling you my thoughts. Now, as someone who has dozens of BFS reels, will the Metanium DC replace any of them for bait finesse? Well, the answer is, of course not. But if you have a Metanium DC, this video shows that it can absolutely do BFS down to 1.5 grams with decently acceptable results. Now, of course, your results may vary depending on what rod and line you use and your BFS experience. But I would estimate that with the 3.3 gram lure, you can get about 70 feet on a good cast. with the 2.3 gram about 60 feet, and with the 1.4 gram about 40 to 45 feet. I guess I shouldn't be surprised since the SLX DC XT did quite well for its bait finesse test, and the Metanium DC has a lighter spool. Now unfortunately, as you can see, I wasn't able to catch any fish, but I did take the Metanium DC to Colorado recently, and I caught a small brown trout using the Spearhead RYOGA, but unfortunately I was not recording. So there we go, fellas. The mighty Metanium DC proves its worth by showing its versatility. Alright guys, thanks a lot.